Good morning, everyone. So, my name is Audrey. I have been a software developer for almost 10 years now. I would have never imagined myself being here today making a keynote, especially with this French accent of mine. So, thanks again for having me. I started by working for services companies. More recently, I've been working for startups. And I also was, or still am, involved in several initiatives, conferences, podcasts, and so on. Now that I have introduced myself, I'd like to know a little bit more about you. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Who amongst you is a male? Who amongst you is a white male? Who amongst you is a white male, let's say between 25 and 45 years old? That's great. I'm glad that there are so many of you today because this keynote has been especially written for you. This keynote is entitled The Hitchhiker's Guide to Diversity, and before getting into the heart of the matter, I'd like to make an aside for those of you who maybe don't know the reference. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, H2G2 for those who know, is a science fiction radio drama created by Douglas Adams at the end of the 70s for the BBC. Then it became a book series and more recently a film. And at the heart of this series is this guide, the Hitchhiker's Guide. In this series, you will in particular learn that the answer to the ultimate question of life, everything, the universe and everything is 42, which is probably as essential to your geek culture as knowing what a Dalek looks like. And in this guide, which seeks to be reassuring, as mentioned, don't panic, is written in capital letter on its cover, you will, among other things, learn how to visit the galaxy on less than $30 a day. Quite an opportunity, isn't it? As you may have understood, the present guide purpose is to guide you through the exploration of diversity in IT, which is wonderful, but nevertheless full of traps. Because being myself, both a woman and a developer, I find myself at the center of the major issues of our ecosystem. How do you manage to hire women? How can you have women contributing to open source projects? How do you have female speakers talking at your conference? When we learn that 41% of women leave IT after 10 years, we can easily figure out that the answer is not as simple as 42. However, there are a few little things to know that might help you if you do want to succeed in this quest. And that's the reason why I wrote this guide, especially for you, gentlemen, developers. And I think that one of the first things we need to realize when talking about diversity is that diversity is not only about gender. You probably understood quite quickly with the Q&A game we played at the beginning that there is today a typical profile of a developer who is a man, white, straight, rather young, without mental disability, no physical handicap. The data I'm showing you here comes from the Stack Overflow 2019 survey, which is published every year and profiles many aspects of an IT professional, personal as well as purely technical. So I guess you would have understood from those numbers that diversity in our ecosystem, and probably in many others who are facing the same kind of issues, is not only about gender. It's also about sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, handicap. In short, introducing diversity into your team means more than simply hiring a woman. However, being myself a white, healthy woman, I point that out because inequalities are like bugs. They tend to accumulate. That's the example I'm going to take during this presentation, simply because that's the one I know. However, it's really important that you keep in mind that I will try to share with you today is also applicable to all of the forms of discrimination. And before talking about how, let's start by asking ourselves why. Why do you want to have diversity into your teams? What are you looking for? Is it because you want to be sure that your product is not discriminating against anybody? Is it because you want to have a team which is more representative of the society we're living in? Is it because you want to have diverse sensitivities in it? Oh yeah, maybe I know. Maybe you want to have women in your team to calm the locker room atmosphere that exists in there. That's an argument I heard a lot, and which is based on the theory that if we introduce into a group which shares a culture, an individual coming from a different culture, the rest of the group will try to appear at its best and will tend to reduce any behavior that might be negatively perceived. Well, I am deeply sorry, but I have to tell you that having myself been the only woman in the midst of the post-match locker room celebrations when we beat the opposition, it's not enough. And it won't be enough because no matter what your original intention was, just wishing it will not make everything work magically. Having different people in your team does not make diversity work. What you need to do first is to build a respectful, safe, and inclusive workplace for all of us, so that those different people may both express themselves freely, knowing that they will be heard, and fully realize their potential. When I wrote this keynote last year, a question in the job priorities part caught my attention. This question dealt with differences in the way that each gender assesses the attractiveness of an employment opportunity. I kept only the first 4 criteria, as they are both the most important, and I think the most relevant. For men, in first place, come the compensation and benefits on offer. Then come the languages, frameworks, and technologies, followed by opportunities for professional development, and last of all comes the office environment or company culture. For women, it is this office environment and company culture which comes first, with opportunities for professional development second, languages, frameworks, and technologies in third place, and finally at the bottom of our list comes the compensation and benefits on offer. For non-binary people, the first criteria is also, and even more importantly, the culture of the company. The office environment and culture of the company, followed by the languages, framework, and technologies. Then comes compensation and benefits on offer. And finally, a criterion we haven't seen in our list so far, the diversity of the company. We therefore have a complete inversion of priorities between men and women, and a slightly different prioritization for non-binary persons, but which is still going to prioritize the office environment and culture, plus another criterion we didn't see elsewhere, the diversity of the company. I don't know whether for you, as man, this ranking seems relevant, but for me, as a woman, it is. When looking at those numbers, one might be tempted to think that, well, it's normal because, men are more careerists than women. But absolutely not. That's just a stereotype strongly encoded in society, but completely unfounded. Some women do want to have a career. Some women do want to have a position with responsibilities. Some women do want to create their own businesses. And on the other hand, some men don't. As for me, in my professional choices, I'm indeed going to care about the culture of the company I'm applying to, simply because I'm looking for a workplace where I can be sure of being respected, both as a developer and as a woman. Because no normal individual wants to go to work with fear in their heart, wondering which humiliating comments or behavior they will suffer today. No one. And yes, this is simply because I want to be sure that if I join the company, I will have exactly the same chance as my male colleagues to get a promotion. That I won't be kept out of position with responsibilities simply because of my gender, or because I might want one day to have children. And as I said previously, the fact that those criteria are arriving in third and fourth positions for men is not due to a so-called character trait that would be inherent to men. It's actually pretty normal that these are not your first concerns, because there is so much less danger of you becoming a victim of sexism at work, or of being refused a job or a promotion just because you're a man. So freed from those two concerns, you can simply focus on what's important for you, which is both natural and human. Moreover, in the 2019 edition of this survey, this question has been slightly modified to not include the compensation and benefits on offer in the answers. The question is now a comparison between two job offers with the same income, and instead offers a new answer, which is flex time or flexible schedule. For non-binary persons, this new criterion has simply replaced the compensation and benefits on offer without changing the order of the other three. Whereas for women, the flexible schedule has taken the second position between the culture of the company and the opportunities for professional development. On the other hand, for men, if technical choices is still the first criterion, the culture of the company and the flex time or flexible schedule are now more important than the choice. Languages and frameworks, are still the first criterion. The culture of the company and the flexible schedule are now more important than opportunities for professional development, which proves that, just like us, you're simply looking for a fulfilling work environment. And that's the reason why, rather than asking ourselves how to hire women, or people with disability, or non-straight people, we should instead ask ourselves how to build a safe and inclusive workplace for all of us. A workplace that allows each and every one of us to express his or herself, to achieve one's potential and focus on what's important for him or her. I won't lie to you, we are now entering the most delicate part of the work. If it was a fantasy book, this would be the moment when the hero, after having accepted a quest, suddenly realizes that it is far more complex than it looked when he said yes, and that he will have to question himself, to find in himself resources he didn't know he possessed, and finally to surpass himself in order to fulfill his destiny. Your mission, as an explorer of the universe of diversity, has 3 steps, each as important as the next. The first is to accept. The second, to listen. And lastly, to put yourselves in another's shoes. This might be summed up in a single word: empathy. But don't fool yourself. The fact that it might be summarized in one word doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do. We all have empathy in us. We simply don't all use it equally. But it's in there. It just needs to be activated, to be used more often, to be developed. And if you want to succeed in building this inclusive and safe workplace, you're going to need a lot of empathy. You're going to need a lot of it, because even if you're aware of everything we just talked about, you're still going to make mistakes. Even with all the goodwill in the world, you will continue to mess things up. As for me, until the beginning of the year, I was working in the most kind and respectful team I ever had. I knew it before I accepted the position, and as we've seen previously, it had a real influence on my decision to join them. And still, one day, they messed it up. We were having a troll channel in Slack, which name is, I think, clear enough, so I don't have to explain its purpose. And one day, in that channel, this joke has been sent. Spoiler alert, the equation is false. Don't waste your time solving it. And it's true that the joke might be funny if it was not conveying so many misogynist stereotypes. Women are rubbish at science. Women's favorite hobby is shopping. Women like to be provided for. But that wasn't something all of my colleagues noticed until I pointed it out to them. And once again, I'd like to insist, it was the most kind and respectful team I ever worked with. And that's the reason why, before going further, I'd like us to agree, here and now, all together on something. The fact that you find a joke funny, without saying why it is problematic, doesn't mean you're a misogynist asshole. Just means you're a normal guy. One of the first things we teach our junior is you're not your code, right? Because the code might be poor, but it doesn't mean the developer is. Well, good news. You're not your jokes. The joke is misogynist. The fact that you did not say it doesn't mean you are misogynist too. And that's the reason why it is extremely important not to feel attacked when someone calls you out on a thoughtless comment or joke. Because this is the first step. Accept that this joke or comment, completely banal for you, is hurtful to someone else. Accept that you just messed up, because even if you're not sexist, not racist or homophobic, and you never mean to hurt anyone, you're living in a society which is all of these things, and whose culture has completely integrated those discriminations, de facto hiding them from you with no other target. So now that we are all agreed on this common state of non-discrimination, we can move on to the second of the 3 steps, listen. And here it's listening as opposed to ignoring, silencing, or worse, humiliating, punishing, threatening. Because unfortunately, in this kind of debate, those are common reactions. As for me, when I saw this joke, my first reaction was to try to explain why this kind of joke is dangerous. So I tweeted this. In the French version, it was the joke was signed by a guy named Victor. So by the way, 2 things to know about me. When I get angry, I swear, and I make mistakes. And just in case it's not already obvious, you can generally evaluate how angry I am with the number of swear words I'm using combined to the number of mistakes I'm making. Spoiler alert number 2, this time I was getting very angry. I'm not going to talk about my own message right now. At the moment, I'd like to show you something else. I received a lot of answers to this tweet, and in one of the discussions that started, I made a mistake when answering someone. It was a stupid mistake, one that I normally wouldn't make, but, well, you know, I was angry and I was answering quickly, so I made a mistake. And during the short time it took me to realize my mistake, I had already received this. Oh, by the way, Pivot's dictation was a very famous and extremely difficult dictation exercise in France. Now, you might be surprised by that reaction, but I was not, because I was prepared for it. That is the kind of reaction that regularly happens when you're trying to denounce sexism in society. Someone will try to make you shut up. Someone will try to divert your words. Someone will try to discredit you and explain to you that you're the one having the problem, in order that everyone can continue ignoring the real problem, which is sexism. In a professional environment, you might be and will be most of the time simply ignored, which I'm sure you will agree is quite infuriating when we're talking about sexist insults or behavior. Or you can even be punished, sent on a really crap assignment far from your place, for example. Or you can even be pushed to resign. It really depends on the gravity of what you denounced, of course, and the degree of influence of the concerned party. Are we talking about the rockstar developer of the team, or are we talking about the head of human resources? But those things exist and do happen, even in IT. And these are the reason why people who are suffering from discrimination, or even worse, aggression, remain silent. If you're going to speak out, you have to be ready to get reactions like the one I received. You have to fear the consequences. You're thinking twice about what you might be exposed to before speaking. you're thinking twice about what you are ready to endure before speaking. And that's another part of the problem, because as long as the injured party remains gagged, it's easy to think that the problem does not exist. It's easy to think that, finally, if there are only a few people bothered, and they're the problems themselves. In the example I told you about, I was almost the only one to intervene. My female colleagues mostly did not speak at all, or very little, which might have given the feeling that, after all, wasn't I the only one bothered about that joke? But the same colleagues were sending me private messages to thank me. The very same colleagues hugged me the next day when I came to the office. So no, I wasn't the only one bothered by that joke, definitely. But the thing is, we are not all in a position to take such a risk when these things happen. Not all of us are ready to face the consequences that might come up with speaking out, which, again, is a complete normal and human reaction. But as long as speaking out will remain something useless or even risky, there is a little chance that the situation will change. For me, it was different. I spoke out because I knew that my colleagues would be more likely to listen to me than to try to silence me. And indeed, they did not react like the guy I told you about. They tried to discuss with me, tried to explain to me the reason why they did not see a problem in the joke, but they never tried to shut me up or to tell me that the problem was coming from me. And it's because my colleagues made the choice to discuss the matter with me that I've been able to understand what I told you at the beginning. An awareness of diversity problems in IT is not enough to solve them. I can't stand homophobia or racism. Even so, I have absolutely no experience of what being discriminated against in your day-to-day life because of your sexual orientation or skin color might be. In the exact same way, you might not stand sexism. You may even be a feminist yourself. But you can still have absolutely no experience of how it feels like to be discriminated against in your daily life simply because you're a woman. Before going further, I'd like to make a little break for a small but very important definition. What is feminism? According to Wikipedia, feminism is a range of social movements, political movements and ideologies that share a common goal to define, establish and achieve the political, economic, personal and social equality of the sexes. Feminism incorporates the position that society prioritizes the male point of view and that women are treated unfairly within those societies. Efforts to change that include fighting gender stereotypes and seeking to establish educational and professional opportunities for women that are equal to those for men. And that's all. It's just that. That's fit on one slide. So as you can see, there are no plans for women to conquer the world. There is no question of depriving men of anything, especially their rights, or to blame them all for things which have been done by just a few. Feminism, like any other form of fight against discrimination, is just seeking equality between human beings. So it is possible to be both a man and a feminist, as it is possible to be white and fight against racism, or straight and militate in favor of the LGBT community rights. Those positions are not incompatible. Now that we've clarified this, let's get back to the difficulty of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. One of my colleagues made a very interesting point. He told me, well, you know, the joke is stupid. I know it because my ex-girlfriend has a degree in mathematics. She's way better than me in mathematics, so obviously the joke is stupid. So, let's play a little game. I'd like to ask you to remember your second day at work. You just graduated, you just got your first job. You're probably a little bit nervous as you begin to understand that you still have a lot to learn. And I guess your imposter syndrome is already raising its head, right? Are you back there? Fine. As for me, because I started by working for a services company, my second day at work as a developer was at the customer offices. We were 4 developers in the office, and during the coffee break, the senior of the team came to me and asked me, "Is she happy now? I should change her desktop background?" Could you please raise your hand if you were asked this question on your second day of job? Is she happy now? I should change her desktop background? No one? Okay. Could you please now raise your hand if you have ever asked this question of one of your colleagues? Still no one? Well, you must be normal guys. And that's exactly the problem with normal guys. You probably find stereotypes of women, like those included in the joke, completely ridiculous. So there is a chance that, just like my colleagues, you simply ignored the misogynistic context and only considered the mathematical aspect of the joke, which is admittedly funny. And probably this is because you simply can't imagine that some men might seriously think that women are rubbish at science and that their only interest in life is shopping. But please, don't forget that for some people, that's not a cliché. That's a certainty, as sure as the earth is flat. And it's because I've really been told this kind of things in all seriousness that this kind of jokes don't make me laugh at all. So now you might think that, well, okay, the joke was not that funny after all, but hey, come on, just a joke, no reason to get angry, right? Well, maybe. But when you hear that kind of joke, plus another one, and another one, year after year, it ceases to be just a joke. I think we've all had this colleague who is making the same joke over and over again, haven't we? Yeah. As for me, for 1 year, I had to work with a man who, every time I offered a different opinion from his, would tell me, "What's wrong with you? Do you have your period or what?" 2 or 3 times a week. Every week. During 1 year. I don't know if you can imagine how it feels to spend an entire year having your technical ability denied simply because of some gender differences. But I'm sure you guess that it's not very pleasant. And now I think you can begin to understand what the problem really is. I've just given you 2 examples. And I'd like you to know that those 2 are amongst the least shocking of the many I've had to put up with during my careers. But there are, nevertheless, 2 examples you probably wouldn't appreciate living. And yet, this is something quite usual in a woman's life. It's even something some of us have completely accepted as normal. Don't think that being a feminist is natural for a woman. Some of us still consider this as a swear word because those stereotypes are the cultural norm in which we've been raised. But one day you realize that it might be the norm. It's not normal. But it does take time, a lot of time, and sometimes it never comes. Another interesting reaction coming from one of my colleagues was, "But it's just a joke, little girls aren't going to identify themselves to jokes, are they?" And unfortunately, I have to tell you that, yes, they were. A lot of studies have been done on the topic, and all of them prove that stereotypes have a real effect, that they are easily absorbed by those who are subjected to them, and that they strongly reduce the ability of the subject to express their potential completely. If we take the example of women, in particular, recent studies have shown that it's around the age of 6 that little girls start to consider themselves less smart as boys and begin to lose interest in so-called smart children activities. So no need to ask yourself anymore why there are not more women in science. And that's exactly the experience I was talking about in the tweet I showed you. 2 years ago, during a Devox for Kids, while my male colleagues were introducing workshops to children, I saw this little girl around 8 years old, crying. Something that might happen sometimes, or children may be a little bit nervous. So I just did as I usually would do. I went to her and her mom and asked how I can help. And her mom told me she's crying because she thinks she won't make it because she's a girl. And you know what? I've been doing workshops with kids for more than 6 years now. And it was not the first time I heard a little girl underestimating herself because she was just a girl. Among studies on the stereotype regarding women and mathematics in particular, there is one that I find particularly interesting, and it's the one which is mentioned by Linda Rising in our talk, Agile Mindset and Beyond. This study was composed of a mathematical exam, high degree level, in which participants were split into 2 groups. The questions were the same for both groups, except that for the first group, there was a question regarding the gender of the participant. Funny details, some participants of the first group didn't notice the question, even though they answered it. And yet, their results were consistently under those of the second group. The experiment has been played a few times, of course, with mixed gender groups too, and each time the results were the same. The presence of this question was preventing women participants from performing normally. This is called the stereotype threat, and it has been identified by Steele and Aronson in 1995. Stereotype threat is a situational predicament in which people are or feel themselves to be at risk of conforming to stereotypes about their social group. It may occur whenever an individual's performance might confirm a negative stereotype because stereotype threat is thought to arise from a particular situation rather than from an individual's personality traits or characteristics. Individuals show higher degrees of stereotype threat on tasks they wish to perform well on, and when they identify strongly with the stereotyped group. These effects are also increased when they expect discrimination due to their identification with a negatively stereotyped group. Repeated experiences of stereotype threat can lead to a vicious cycle of diminished confidence, poor performance, and loss of interest in the relevant area of achievement. The interesting thing with the stereotype threat is that it has been studied under different aspects: ethnic minority and intelligence, social class and intelligence, men and social sensibility, men and emotional intelligence. Indeed, you might not have been conscious of that, but nevertheless, you gentlemen are also affected by stereotypes. Being a real man is about drinking beer, being a football supporter and a car lover, right? Being the one who is bringing the money back home, not the one who wants to start a family. Being the one who never cries, who is never afraid, who has no feelings. A real man certainly doesn't want to be considered a sissy, or worse still, girly, effeminate, camp. Do you realize now that stereotypes are deeply impressed into even the language we are using? Because personally, except for the fact that I have never understood the connection between homosexuality or femininity and weakness, cowardliness, or any other insult we want those words to carry, neither do I know a single human being who has never at some point in his or her life been afraid, had a moment of weakness, or who needed to cry. So it's not because the stereotype is rewarding, socially speaking, being associated as it is with force or power, that it's valuable. Like any other stereotypes, it just limits us. We use it simply to label ourselves as being part of a specific group, even though by do we keep ourselves apart from what we could do or what we could be. Do you, as men, find it normal that in 2019, The average paternity leave allowance in most European countries is between 10 and 15 days. Well, yeah. You too are discriminated against because of who you are. So finally, the issue we need to address, if we wish to build a workplace and more importantly a society, which is inclusive and safe for all of us, is not to be worrying about what we can and can say, or if it's still possible to laugh at things or to share an elevator with women. No. What we need to do is to begin by trying to understand what another person is living, to try to understand what he or she has to endure every day, to try to understand what might be the things that we say and do that perpetuates the state of affairs that prevent them from becoming what they really want to be. And this goes through the identification of stereotypes, those we have grown up with, those which are completely integrated into our culture, poisoning the life of each and every one of us, including you, gentlemen. Identify them, learn how to recognize the different ways they are present in our daily life, in our words or in our acts, and decide to fight them. And once again, this is not an easy thing to do. Questioning the culture you've been raised with, the vocabulary you're using sometimes, or even some behaviors that might seem unimportant to you, doesn't come naturally. Because even when you are the victim of those stereotypes, it does take time to identify them. When you are a woman, it does take time to understand that you don't have to accept demeaning jokes, that you don't have to tolerate inappropriate comments, that it's not normal to adapt your outfit to avoid unwanted remarks or even aggression in the street or at work. So obviously when you're trying to understand something which is not what you yourself experience in your day-to-day life, it can't be natural. We will have to learn. And like any learning process, we might make mistakes, and we will make mistakes, and we have the right to make mistakes. But that's not impossible to do it, far from that. So one more time, accept, listen, and put yourself in another's shoes. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to discuss, and don't be afraid to use your empathy over and over again. And the next time you're called out by someone on a comment or joke, don't take it as an offense. Take it as an opportunity. Take it as a chance to learn, identify, and question one of those damn stereotypes that are ruining our lives. Take it as an opportunity to better understand what the person in front of you has to put up with. Because, no, I still don't know how to hire women. But what I do know for sure is that as long as women have to fight to be considered as equal, they will continue to leave technical professions after 10 years. And we will continue to have an ecosystem which is absolutely not representative of the society we're living in, whether we are talking about sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, handicap, or any other form of discrimination. Which, when you stop thinking about it, is a real problem when all of us here are part of an industry which has such an impact on the rest of the world's population. So now, gentlemen, if you agree, I'd like to give you a mission. Because I'm pretty sure none of you know this, but you're not just normal guys. You gentlemen, each of you, has a superpower. It's not something nice for me to say, and it won't be for you to hear. And just to make things clear, this is not something you should apologize for. You never asked for it. But the fact is that at the moment, your voice, as a white, straight man, is worth more than mine will ever be to some of your peers. And it will be worth more than the voice of a black person. And it will be worth more than that of an autistic person or of a trans person. And that will remain the case as long as we're living in a society ruled by stereotypes and the discriminations that come along with them. So you were probably never conscious of it, but it's a kind of privilege that you have, and I now encourage you to turn it into a superpower. Now that you know how to open your mind to empathy, now that you know that you do have the right to be a feminist, an LGBTQ militant, and more generally, to fight against any form of discrimination that you detest, I invite you to break your silence. I invite you to speak out and to use this privilege, which you have turned into a superpower. Because as long as this society remains unfair, unequal, and even dangerous for some of us, we will need you, superheroes, in our daily lives. We will need to hear every single voice that is willing to speak up against those discrimination. So, gentlemen, use the powers you have to make yourself heard, to speak out now and to make a change. Thank you.